This is our third live stream Q&A. I'm Bill, I'm the president of King's, and again, thank you for joining us. We'll start with acknowledging where we are and where we're situated. King's is in Shabuktuk, which is the Mi'kmaq name for Halifax, and we're in Mi'kma'ki, which is the Mi'kmaq word for Nova Scotia. And we acknowledge that we're on the unceded territories of the Mi'kmaq people, and we acknowledge that we live here because of the authority and the strength and the wisdom embedded in the treaties of peace and friendship that the Mi'kmaq agreed to with the original settlers. And under those treaties, we aspire to live up to the values of peaceful coexistence and mutual respect with the Mi'kmaq and with all peoples, and including with the beautiful natural world that surrounds us. And I know we have people joining us from outside Nova Scotia, so on your behalf, and please join me in acknowledging the First Nation territories where you might be located today, and also acknowledging the unceded territories of those First Nations. The other thing I would like to acknowledge, and by wishing you all happy Pride, because it's the beginning of Pride celebrations in Nova Scotia. And I understand that for most of you, certainly those outside Nova Scotia, you're accustomed to Pride happening in June or July, but in Nova Scotia, it happens in August, and we're at the beginning of that celebration. And so we wish you all, whether you're in Nova Scotia or beyond, happy Pride. Today we're changing our focus a little bit. We've talked a lot about vaccinations and different aspects of safety relative to COVID, but today we're talking about bodily autonomy and community care through vaccination. And I have to say, I'm just thrilled that I'm joined today by Jordan Roberts, our Sexualized Violence Prevention and Response Officer. Jordan, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Bill. Hi, my name is Jordan Roberts. I use she and her pronouns. As Bill said, I'm the Sexualized Violence Prevention and Response Officer here at King's. It's a bit of a mouthful of a title, but essentially what I'm here to do is to support students, staff, and faculty for anything under the sun when it comes to consent, sexuality, healthy relationships, and of course, experiences of sexualized violence. So I'm really grateful to the folks from the Advancement Office and to Bill for inviting me to be here today.
And Jordan has reminded me that I didn't share my pronouns, so I want to share with you that my pronouns are he and him. So Jordan, this question is worded in a very official way. It says, define the meaning, but let's do it a little bit more informally. Help us understand what it means to care for your body in relation to vaccines and testing.
Yeah, so when this whole pandemic started and this narrative of, especially before we had vaccines, but COVID testing started to come around, it made me see a lot of the similarities in the work that I do around STI testing and consent. So suddenly the conversations that we normally reserve for intimate romantic partners, we were suddenly having with our colleagues and people that we share kind of less intimate spaces with about here's how close you can come to my body, here's what I want to be wearing on my body and have you on your body in terms of masks and other PPE. Have you been tested? What's your testing schedule? What's your status? Those are the kinds of questions that we've been asking each other about our health. And I think that there's a lot of ways over the last year and a half that that's been scary, that that's been overwhelming, that has stopped us from seeing loved ones or being able to participate in things that were healthy for our lives and healthy for our mental health. But one of the things that I'm hoping lingers as we move to a different phase of living with COVID, I hope that open communication about what we need to have for safety and respect of our bodies and how we can contribute to the safety and respect of other people's bodies continues. So specifically when it comes to vaccines, I here at King's, we're promoting the vaccine, and I definitely think that folks who are able to should access that. In Nova Scotia, the access to that has become very, very easy in terms of being able to go to Nova Scotia Health websites and find spaces that you can find an open appointment for all ages. They're no longer doing the age restrictions, and King's has pieces in place that if you don't know where to access that vaccine, especially if you're coming from another province or part of the world and trying to figure out how to get your first or second dose, there's supports here that can help you find that place to do it. Caring for our bodies when it comes to vaccines is like caring for our bodies kind of like if we think we're going to get the flu. Our immune system is going to be a little out of whack for a few days, maybe, potentially. So it's a really good time to focus on sleep, on rest. It's a really good time to focus on fueling our bodies with food that makes it feel good. It's a really great time to hydrate. There's always really great times to get lots of rest and eat well and hydrate, but typically as students, that's not so much of what we can have. So it's a really great time to take care of our bodies, and if you're thinking about doing that towards the beginning of the semester, think about how you can keep those habits all through September, if that's possible. And yeah, so getting vaccinated is a really great way to also prepare for the best possible year in terms of having access to, when we think about having a reopened campus where there's going to be more opportunities to gather in person for academics and for our social lives, knowing that we're vaccinated has us with the most comfortable and risk-aware steps of being able to do that.
So I think that leads to my next question, which is to ask you to help us understand what it means to care for the collective body when it comes to vaccines and testing.
Yeah, I think, again, if we want to see any silver linings to what we've experienced this last year and a half, it's really showed us that we can't live independent and isolated. There's no way to live in COVID and live with COVID as an island. Mutual aid, collective care, community care, these are terms and practices that I think have really spiked in public consciousness in the last year and a half. And getting the vaccine is a way to contribute to that. Being able to know that you're doing something that might help another student or might help a colleague that has an immunocompromised person at home. Or a lot of us have children that are under 12 and cannot be vaccinated yet. And so we're trying to make decisions that are, yes, best for our bodies and for our lives, and also trying to think about the communities that we want to integrate into, and the decisions that we can be making that are going to be best for those communities as a whole. Right. And I think that King's is doing a lot to provide resources and supports for helping people make those decisions in ways that feel best to them, have the most information that they might need to make those decisions confidently, and of course the logistical resources of how to test and get vaccinated when those times come.
I'm glad you mentioned the wider community, because that's one of the reasons Nova Scotia has been relatively successful in controlling the pandemic, is the way in which people inside communities like King's and other communities in Nova Scotia feel responsibility for the broader community around them. And I'm incredibly proud of everyone at King's, including our students, for how proud they were to be part of Halifax's and Nova Scotia's successful response to the pandemic.
Yeah.
And on the topic of vaccination, because we've been asking you, those who are joining us this afternoon, to get vaccinated if you could, and I have some very exciting news to share. So we surveyed everyone in our community, faculty, staff, and students, current students and prospective students, and that's just about 1,100 people, 1,100 people. And amazingly, we had 513 people respond to the survey. So that's a very strong survey when you have essentially a 50% survey result. And the bottom line is, with the exception of 3 people who identified as being not able to get vaccinated, everyone else who replied to the survey said they're vaccinated or they're getting vaccinated. And there's a few, because of their circumstances, they will do that when they come to Nova Scotia as opposed to before they come. So that's amazing. And some of you listening are undoubtedly much better at math than I am, but I'm told that that's indicates a vaccination rate of somewhere around or above 95% of our community. And you hear the public health officials saying an 80% or an 85% rate of vaccination is really, really strong. And then even more impressively, we've surveyed our residents' population. So that's going to be 238 students living in residence, 100% response to that survey. And that shows that 98% of our resident students will be vaccinated, fully vaccinated before they come. And within a few weeks of the start of the year, we'll have 99% vaccinated, because we have a small number of students, as I said before, who are going to either do or complete the vaccination process after they get to Nova Scotia. So with numbers like that, I'm sure the people who are listening are among those who have shown care for the community by getting vaccinated or are in the process of getting vaccinated. So thank you very, very much for that. So Jordan, you certainly got a lot of attention at King's when you raised the issue of COVID trauma and the possible anxieties about returning to campus for students. So can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah. I sit on the Occupational Health and Safety Committee at King's, and as we're talking about the logistics of returning and how that's practically going to look with masks and distance and capacity numbers and those kinds of things, people, and I think wonderfully, started to speak up about some of the emotional pieces of returning to campus. The analogy that I've been using is we're all kind of cats under a porch, and King's is shaking a bag of treats, trying to encourage us to reemerge.
You're not from Newfoundland, are you?
And so I think that we're all very understandably, despite how hard the isolation and working remotely, studying remotely, living remotely, not being able to travel, not being able to gather with our friends and our loved ones and family, that has been hard, that's been devastating, that's been deeply impactful for many, many people, if not everyone. However, after a certain amount of time, 16 months, habits become habits.
Right.
In the most recent kind of workshop discussion I had about this is, it's a pretty common phenomenon to watch a TV show or a movie where there's a bar scene or a club scene or people gathered, and there's kind of a reaction of seeing people being so close, because it's not what we're used to anymore. And so I think that as excited as we are to be gathered in person for learning and socializing and all the wonderful things that can happen at King's and in Halifax in the fall, there's going to be some very understandable apprehension and some very understandable anxieties, hesitancies, fears, concerns about coming back to campus life. And that's really real and that's really valid. And as much as we want to celebrate what we're returning to, we don't want that tone of celebration to outweigh and silence people who have concerns. And I think it's also important to remember that not all of us are returning. There's many members of our campus community, yourself included, Bill, that have been here this whole time, our facilities members, our custodial members, who have put on the PPE to stay and make sure our campus is clean and safe and functioning and ready for us to return. So just trying to balance the celebration with just taking a little bit of time and space and gentleness with ourselves and each other. And those coping strategies and how we prepare for that looks different for everyone. I was joking with the folks here because I was running a little late. Remembering commute times, remembering, I don't know, I've had to look in my closet and think, what do you wear on a bottom half? Because I've only had to worry about what shirt I've been wearing for Zoom calls the last year and a half. So how do you pick out clothes on a daily basis? Pack a lunch, get up, leave your house for 8 hours and come back having this conversation with people who are thinking, how do you fit a day of work and maybe some time at the gym and maybe some time with friends and doing laundry and getting groceries? How do you fit that all in a day? So it's going to be about being gentle with each other, being understanding if we seem a little scattered when we all come back, being very compassionate with ourselves if we're used to a certain kind of functioning, a certain kind of performance, recognizing that we might not be where we were in 2019 or early 2020, and that's okay. I don't want to label this as a traumatic experience for anybody if that's not what feels appropriate for them, but it is on a national scale. And the impacts of trauma are biological, impact our brains, impact our functioning, and you're not less than, and you're not worse than you were before to be impacted by those things.
So, we say we have to go through this together, and I think what you're pointing to is a very important aspect of what we need to do for each other as we go forward together, which is being respectful of the different ways that this experience has affected us, and the experience of coming back together physically will affect each of us. So it's time now to answer some of your questions, and Chelsea Walsh, our social media coordinator, will share your questions with us.
Yes, thank you. I'm also here with my colleague, Courtney McAlorum, and she will be busy behind the scenes answering or collecting any of your questions. So if you have any questions that you'd like to ask right now, pop them in the comments section and we'll collect them as we go. And if we have some time, we'll try and answer as many as we can. The first question, and I will thank anyone who asked questions earlier the week in our Instagram story. Our first question comes from there. And Jordan, someone asks, what should I do if I'm nervous about going to school every day again?
Yeah, that's really understandable. That nervousness can come from a lot of different places. It can come from COVID. We've been told for the last year and a half that being around people is something that's dangerous. And to put that fear away is going to take some time, even if we rationally, scientifically, the CDC, Dr. Strang is telling us that it's safe. Our brains do a really good job at protecting us. And sometimes that means retaining emotions and retaining information, even when the factual reality of that has gone away. So going to school every day, there's a few different mechanisms for that. Part of it is practice. Some of us haven't been on campus or haven't been outside of our little neighborhood bubbles in quite some time. So even walking to campus, not to go in a building, not to go in a class, but just to start in reintroducing yourself to a physical space can mean a lot. Figuring out how and if you can take breaks throughout the day. Kings and Dal has a few different areas for kind of peacefulness, mindful meditation in the Dalhousie Student Union building. There's a space in the lower level. King's has the chapel as a space where people can go for just some quiet, private time. And I think finding those spaces in the run of a day, even just going for a walk around Coburg or around the neighborhood, just to think about not being surrounded by people every day, but taking that little moment. Again, the isolation is hard, but when you're used to it, having that little moment of privacy becomes really important. And the other reminder is maybe you don't have to go to campus every day. Maybe there's a way to schedule your classes that gives you a day or two a week of a break. Maybe you were taking 5 classes, and for this fall semester, taking 4 is going to be what's best for you. There's ways that you can work with academic advising, as well with the different offices that provide accommodations, which includes me, to find ways that can support your transition back. And it's not all or nothing. You can do a 3 or 4 course semester in the fall and go back to 5 in the winter. You can take your first few weeks to spend less time on campus, and then when it feels right, maybe in October, November, spend more time there. But being gentle, being gradual, it's entering a cold lake. Some people cannonball right in, and some people walk really, really slow until they're fully submerged. Both of those are valid. It's about what's going to make you feel safest.
Definitely, and that actually leads us into our next question. And you mentioned some of the resources that are available, like some quiet spaces for mindfulness, and some great tips. But what other resources are available on campus or even off campus to students if they're feeling anxious?
Yeah. So at King's, we have our peer support workers who are going to be set up in their office in the A&A building again. If you're living in residence, your Dawn, the residence life staff team, is going to be available for you. We have Father Ingalls as our chaplain who's available to talk to folks. Myself as SVPRO, and we have a new equity officer, Rayma, who are both of us will be available to provide supports to students who are trying to manage those feelings, manage perhaps other experiences. As we know, know it's not just COVID that we've been dealing with and experiencing this last year and a half, it's everything else. And it's really exciting to have an equity officer who's going to be able to support students who have been watching the world have a variety of pandemics when it comes to what we've been seeing in residential schools in Canada, what we've been seeing with the Black Lives Matter movement. There's a lot of really impactful, traumatic, crisis-feeling things that have happened within and alongside this pandemic and have affected how both of those things have been felt and how we've been able to cope with grief, which is a huge feeling that comes up with the losses that we've experienced in our lives and in our society. So I think that there's lots of people on campus. There's new roles on campus. We also have a new person, Issa Wright, in the position of student support coordinator. I might be getting that title wrong.
Close enough.
But we're going to have a few people who are here to provide the direct services to students, as well as making sure that the structure of supports at King's are richer. And just a reminder, speaking from my position, not just here for students. Love students. We always want to be focusing on students. That's who our campus is here for. But staff and faculty may also be having these kinds of reactions, and supports are available for them as well.
And I might just add, there's additional supports available at Dalhousie. And one of the ways you and your colleagues that you just mentioned can support students is make sure our students are connected to those additional resources that are available at Dal. And I'd like to take the moment to just emphasize for King students that those Dal services are actually every bit as much your services as they are the services of people who think of themselves as Dalhousie students. Next question.
Great. So the next question is actually about the vaccination survey, and knowing what we know in numbers and all the information about people coming back to campus. Bill, how do you think this will affect or impact life on campus this fall?
Well, I think it varies for individuals. And I'm pretty sure this wouldn't be the case, but we don't want anyone to get the impression that because we're expecting almost 100% of people to be vaccinated, that means that we don't have issues that we need to continue to pay attention to. And in addition to the anxiety and the trauma that Jordan was talking about, I'm sure everyone knows this, we're learning more and more all the time about what the vaccination does and does not do. And it's now been confirmed that it doesn't prevent contraction or transmission of the virus. And we have to be aware of what the vaccination levels are going to be around us. And Nova Scotia is doing very well, but I have to say that there's a leveling off of vaccinations in the general population in your age group, the age group between 20 and 30. So we have to be very, very conscious about that because we are very concerned for the health of those that we interact with in the community. Because we know that vaccination alone doesn't prevent us from getting the virus, and in some very small number of cases from causing illness, it's going to be very, very important that we develop the discipline of relying on our second line of defense, which is regular and frequent testing. Mm-hmm. And if you're not from Nova Scotia, you may not live in a community that has embraced testing the way Nova Scotians have embraced testing. Certainly whenever you're feeling in any way that is consistent with COVID symptoms, you should get tested, and you should remove yourself from activities until you know what the result of those tests are. And just regular testing, whether or not you're feeling like you might have any symptoms, is something that you should get comfortable with. And if you're from Nova Scotia, you're probably already comfortable with that. And to facilitate that, I want you all to know that whereas earlier in the summer we were telling you that there'll be a testing site conveniently available on the Dalhousie campus, we're very excited to be able to tell you today that there'll be a testing site on the King's campus. And so you'll be, if you're someone who's going to be eating in our dining hall you'll be walking by it on a daily basis. And the last thing I think I'll mention, just so there's an awareness of this, as we start the academic year, we will still be expecting people to wear masks when they're indoors, or at least in public indoor locations. And we're all watching the news, and so while we're very confident, because we can take advantage of all that Nova Scotia has accomplished, and we've done our homework here at King's, and we have good systems and plans in place. We know that uncertainty about this virus and the pandemic continues to play itself out across the world, and certainly across Canada. So when I mention masks, we don't know for certain whether or not there might be a need for masking on a longer term basis, or at some point in the academic year, even if we've decided that we can relax expectations around masking. And we will have contingency plans in place to make sure that we can quickly deal with whatever happens relative to the pandemic that requires us to take additional measures to ensure your safety.
And President Lahey, for those who are wondering, or just for clarification, also I'm very curious. So everyone on the Dal campus as well as the King's campus could get a test, a COVID test on either campus?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah. Now the kinds of tests I'm talking about are the so-called rapid tests. So they're not as necessarily accurate as the more clinical tests. But what they give you is information on which you can then decide whether or not the responsible thing to do, or even the required thing to do, is to go and get a more clinical test.
Right. And they're so excellent at doing that here in Nova Scotia. Jordan, we have a question from the audience. What do I do if COVID restrictions ease on campus, but I'm still nervous about being in public without a mask or socially distancing myself from others? I know you mentioned some resources, but do you have any more advice on that?
Yeah, and I think that this is, again, where this collective care, this community care takes place. I think if somebody continues to want to wear their mask, they should. And it's a space not to be questioned about that choice. Don't you know the mandate is gone? Don't you feel safe? Don't you know our vaccination rate? We don't know what people's personal health experiences are, and we don't know what their home health experiences are. Other people that they may be caring for in their lives, or plans that they're trying to make in terms of travel or future steps. So I think I would put the onus less on the person who wants to continue to wear the mask and more on our collective community. If there's somebody in your workspace, if there's somebody in your classroom that you see continuing to wear a mask even after mandates pass, maybe that's a moment to have a conversation in that group of people gathering regularly about how that space can be safer. Should this classroom, if we're a group of 15 people that meet for a tutorial, do we want to keep wearing masks because there's one or two or three people in this classroom that's going to allow them to bring their brilliance and bring their engagement in a more confident way? And the same with the different departments and offices around our King's campus. So I think for the individual, just knowing that you have the right to prioritize your health in a way that makes sense for you when it comes to mask and distancing, and again, this is where I bring it back to those conversations of consent, those conversations that we're taught to have in very intimate partnership times, but we can bring to a more open state, to a more general place in our lives. This is how I feel comfortable protecting myself and my body, and I'm asking people around me to buy into that protection because it's for me and it's for you. Yeah. And just knowing, and if there are concerns, if you're trying to do something distance or wear masks or keep the space that you occupy on campus to certain degrees that maybe are a little on a different point of the spectrum than where King's in Nova Scotia is, and you're not feeling supported by that, please know that you can come to me. You can come to our equity officer. You can come to our HR person. You can go to your Dawn, to your Dean of Students, to your peer support workers, to either help find the ways that King's can support those boundaries, and also just finding ways for us to use our own voice. putting boundaries for ourselves is hard. That's a lot of the workshops I've done before COVID. And so this is just another way that we can strengthen that muscle of knowing what we deserve for our health and our bodies, and helping people around us understand that and see that we deserve that as well.
If I could just add, Chelsea, we will be encouraging people to wear masks beyond anything that feels like a mandate. There'll be a clear expectation early in September, and maybe at other times, as I explained earlier. But we want to encourage people to wear masks. And I'll just tell you, as somebody who has a health status that makes it difficult for me when I get the flu, for example, I'm looking forward to frequently wearing my mask. I don't think I'll wear it all the time when I'm in public, but it's not just COVID, and you alluded to this earlier, Jordan. There are other infections that we live with regularly that we probably do well, not if we weren't as exposed to them. So I think we'll work very hard to create that culture that you're describing, where if somebody wants to wear a mask, they'll feel comfortable doing that.
Yeah.
I know I will avoid the cold if I can, so a mask sounds great. Our final question that we'll ask today, I'll actually be able to answer, and it is, will the live stream be posted and captioned afterwards for students who can't make it? And yes, it will. So you can check out this video on IGTV. We might even be able to upload it to YouTube, but make sure you're following us on all social media platforms for updates and also for our next live stream. So that is all from me, and back over to you, President Lahey.
Thanks very much, Chelsea. All I have to do is to say thank you to Jordan. Jordan, that was all amazing. Thank you very much for joining me. Anyone that hadn't had a chance to hear Jordan before, you now have an additional reason to come to King's. So you can spend more time listening to and talking with Jordan. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you for your great questions. And we're getting excited about welcoming you physically to campus in now just a few weeks. And happy Pride, Nova Scotia. Next time, take care. Bye-bye.